So, hopefully we haven't missed too much, but we're on number like 15. We talked about the whirl stage and the organizing stage, which is when it touches the ground, and the mature stage is when a tornado darkens. And why does the tornado darken? Max?
It picks up dirt and things from the ground.
Right. Debris, dirt, it gets darker. That's a mature stage. And what did you guys just tell me about it? This is when a tornado is the most destructive. And then what are the other two stages, Jesse?
The shrinking and the decaying.
Good. And I have a note in the decaying phase, the tornado part is not actually visible. The storm is really giving up at that point. And Meredith, what are the 4 classifications that lead to a hurricane?
Tropical disturbance, tropical depression, tropical storm, tropical cyclone, and tropical cyclone.
Good. And how do they determine what a storm is?
From wind speeds.
Just wind speed. So it doesn't have anything to do with how much destruction it does over land, like a tornado. It's just wind speed for hurricanes. And I don't think that you have to memorize the specific wind speeds for each category, but you do need to know the order, and that wind speed is the only thing that differentiates one from another. Yes.
How does the clouds and the tornadoes start going around and around?
Upper level winds, and actually one of the videos, if I can find the one my husband showed me, upper level winds really can be blowing in a completely different direction than mid and lower level winds, and you actually see it in some of these storms. And I don't know, when I watch tornado videos, I'm no expert on weather for sure, but it looks to me like it has something to do with the upper level winds going this way and the lower level winds going this way, and it does start that. And then the updraft forms, and then that just kind of contributes to the spin. But, you know, there is no real confident description of why a tornado forms sometimes and it doesn't form other times. Bethany?
Isn't there like a theory that when you have the higher level winds and the lower level winds, and one is colder or hotter than the other, then they start chasing each other around?
You know, I am definitely no expert on tornado formation, and I've watched videos and it looks like nobody really is explaining it super thoroughly. So if you find something, just hit reply all and email the class a link. But definitely a great area of study. Last year I had a student do his final project on tornadoes and how they're categorized, because we don't really talk about that a lot in this class. And they're not like hurricanes that are categorized on wind speed. They're categorized on how much destruction they do. So, there's definitely a lot that we didn't go over about tornadoes. But we will never finish the class if we talk about all that. Or you can see Caleb. He knows a lot about tornadoes.
And why is the vortex an area of low pressure itself in the text?
For the hurricane? Or the tornado? The hurricane, we are about to talk about that. So let's ask the next question to Jenna, and then we'll talk about that. So Jenna, what are the conditions in the eye of a hurricane?
It is a calm area which can have a sunny sky and the winds are calm. And it has low pressure.
Right. Okay, so do we have questions about how hurricanes form? Yes, so let's talk about the next question, and then we'll talk more about the eye and the center of the vortex and why it's calm. So Anna, what causes a hurricane? Does it ask you really about the southern hemisphere? Oh. What causes a hurricane in the southern hemisphere to rotate in a different direction than a hurricane in the northern hemisphere?
Whirl effect?
Yeah, the Coriolis effect, exactly. And which way does a hurricane go here in the northern hemisphere for us? Counterclockwise. So for us in the northern hemisphere, our hurricanes, the clock goes this way, so our hurricanes go that's terrible, this way, counterclockwise.
And the Coriolis effect then is the wind?
Yes, so if you think people say, oh, flushing a toilet, it goes this way in our hemisphere and that way in their hemisphere because of the Coriolis effect. Well, that's just not the case. Because really, your entire toilet is at exactly the same latitude. It's this big, right? But for a hurricane, it's huge, right? Hundreds of miles across. And so truly, when you have an area, a hurricane always starts with an area of low pressure. Okay, the center of a hurricane is an area of very low pressure. And so where pressure is low, what will air from every direction do? Right? If you have low pressure here and everywhere else is higher pressure around it, then air will... Does air move toward low pressure or away from low pressure? Toward low pressure, okay? So think of a vacuum. A vacuum that you clean your house with is an area of low pressure. You create a vacuum, right? Air moves toward it. A hurricane is similar. You've got an area of low pressure that develops, and air starts rushing in from all directions toward it. Air that is coming in from the north toward that low pressure system, right? It starts at a higher latitude and moves in toward the equator in the northern hemisphere from the north, right? And so that air will be going slower, and as it moves south toward the equator, that air will get outrun by the sea, right? As the earth turns. And so it'll bend west. Then air that is coming toward that low pressure system from closer to the equator and it's moving north, well, it'll be going fast and it'll outrun the sea and it'll bend east. Spatial skills. So then that air is bending this way, that air is bending this way, and you start to get a rotation because of the Coriolis effect as that air rushes toward the center of a low pressure system. So that's how that happens. And what other conditions besides that low pressure and air rushing toward it, bending because of the Coriolis effect, where do hurricanes have to form? Over water. And what kind of water specifically? Really warm ocean water, yeah. So they have to have big enough space to form, they have to have low pressure to form, and they have to form over warm water. If a hurricane starts to move north and the water gets colder and colder under it, it just won't have the energy to feed it and it will dissipate. So have to form where it's quite warm water. Was there something else we were supposed to talk about? Joshua, you were supposed to tell me something, and I don't remember what.
You already explained it.
Sorry. You have to wave your hands around and stop me.
So it has to form over a warm ocean. Because
Warm
the
ocean.
humid air can keep
Yes.
out.
So what if you're standing in the eye of a hurricane, what do you see?
Blue sky.
Happy, beautiful. There was a hurricane right before we moved to Norfolk a couple duty stations ago. There was a hurricane, and our neighborhood actually had the eye go right over it. And so when we moved in, the neighbors were telling us, like, we all had to, one tree fell on the people across the street from us. It fell right on their house. And they knew that the second half of the hurricane was going to come, so all the men ran out with chainsaws and cut down this whole tree during the eye of the storm so that the next part, they would be able to tarp it and stop it from completely destroying the house. So, yeah, but it gave them enough time to get the big part of the tree off the house. So, yeah. And it was beautiful, sunny weather, and it was crazy.
You know that the rest of it's
Clouds
coming.
around you?
You can in the distance, but the eye is usually big enough that there's a point where it just is really beautiful.
10 miles, I think.
But people die who don't know
The
because...
eyewall is really dangerous.
Yes, the worst part of the storm hits right after the eye passes over you. So if you go out and think it's over and then you can't get back to shelter in time, you get hit with the most violent part of the hurricane.
Yeah, because I had time to pick up tons and tons of objects that could hit you.
And it's just the way that storms turn, the part right there is where the biggest winds are. If you happen to be hit with what comes right after the eye, it's really bad. So where am I?
You're on me.
Okay,
No,
Lily.
No, sorry. You already done? Yeah.
Anna told me about the Coriolis
Oh,
effect.
this thing. 19?
19 is the... okay, so we have a map, which I am going to put my finger on here. Is atmospheric pressure in Houston higher, lower, or nearly equivalent to that of Chicago? If you can't see one of these maps, get one where you can
It's
see
nearly
it.
equivalent. Because the isomars, is that what they're
Isobar.
called? Isobars.
Isobar.
If you count them out, they're all 3 apart.
Okay, so
So it's nearly
Houston
equivalent.
and Chicago. Yes. So if you look at that map, you can see the area of low, and everything within that isobar where the low pressure system is pretty similar in pressure. And then the next bar out is just a little higher, and the next bar out's a little higher. And Houston and Indianapolis are in that, third bar out.
I don't know. Houston isn't, though.
Houston
Indianapolis
isn't?
is in it. You mean Chicago?
Oh, Chicago and Houston.
Indianapolis is in the
Two.
second. the third
Okay,
one.
so Houston and Chicago are in the third bar out, that section, but they're in the same section. So even though geographically they're very far apart, they're in the same bar. So they're going to have similar pressure. Elise, is the atmospheric pressure in Houston higher, lower, or equivalent to Atlanta?
Lower.
So in Houston is lower than Atlanta, and how could you tell?
Because it's inside the lower isobar.
There's 4 bars
Great.
separating it, right, from Atlanta. There's 4 bars. It's on the 4th, outside of the 4th bar.
Yeah, so if we count like Atlanta's 1, 2, 3, 4 from the low, then Houston would be 1, 2, 3 from the low. So Houston has,
So does that mean Atlanta has higher pressure because it's farther away from the low?
yes. Is that confusing? That is confusing. Exactly what Lily just said. Houston has higher pressure. No, Atlanta has higher pressure because it's more isobars away from the low. So Houston should have lower pressure than Atlanta because it's closer to the low, isobar-wise, not geography-wise. And Ava, is the occluded front nearer to San Francisco or Canada? So which thing is an occluded front? He spends about 3 seconds on this in the book, so. So, let me do some drawing on the board here. Here's this week's assignment, so if you forgot to write it down, it'll at least be there. And maybe I can hit pause or something.